Welcome to the WebWell podcast, brought to you by Cascade Web Development. I'm one of your hosts, Simon, along with Ben, and we can't wait to dive into all things internet, tech, web development, and web design. We'll also be discussing how we balance work and life and exploring the fascinating world of internet innovation. So whether you're a tech enthusiast or just looking for some entertainment, join us on this exciting journey as we explore the ever-changing landscape of the web. Thanks for tuning in, and let's get started. Welcome, everyone, to the WebWell podcast. This is episode 2. I'm joined here with Ben. Super excited to have everyone join us as we're feeling like seasoned veterans on this show, right? Being the second time we've done this. But we're really excited. Ben, how you feeling?
Yeah. Feeling great on this end, ready to jump in.
Just as you swig some water.
They can't. Yeah, they can't see that. We're all good. Excited to jump in though. We're, like I said, we're old pros at this. So thanks for bringing us all together here once again, Simon.
Yeah. No, I figured, okay, so the first part of our sessions, or at least the beginning part of our podcast, ends up going somewhat smoothly and really just trying to talk about what we have done the last couple of weeks, since it's been 2 weeks. And for all the listeners out there, my goal is that I can keep this to a 2-week interval. So 2 episodes a month. If we can pick it up even more than that, we will. But otherwise, we're going to aim at that and target first and last week or first and second week in the month. So just keep an eye on that. Don't forget to subscribe and follow. But yeah, so this is the part where we kind of check in to see what we've been doing. I'll jump in first, mainly because I'm trying to wake up. A couple of weeks ago, I sprained my rib, which apparently is worse than breaking it. So real stupid snowboard accident where I just wasn't paying attention, caught an edge, 20 yards from the lift and just fell. It was real stupid. But in that split second, saw stars and looked around. No one saw me except for my wife and son, who were laughing because I don't fall ever. But basically went down the hill wheezing and just pain and went to where no one could see me and laid down for a little bit and just suffered. But I'm recovering. Went to the chiropractor. He made it hurt really more that night. But basically, yeah, I'm just working through this pain and hopefully get better. Yeah.
Wow. Well, I know a thing or two about falling on snow. I guess my only advice to you is the softer the snow, the easier the blow. But I've done my fair share of falling on the hard stuff, and at one point cracked 4 ribs and punctured a lung. Didn't get X-rayed for 4 days, and fortunately navigated that all right. But it doesn't hurt less as we get a little bit older and more fragile.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that because for all the listeners that don't know, so every Monday morning at 10, we have a team all together kind of meeting on Zoom. And I had mentioned that as a review of my weekend. And both you, I remember you saying that, and Stefan were just go to the doctor right now. We know people that have died from it. And I was like, oh man, got me all worried. So I had to call and get my appointment scheduled pretty quick because I was all concerned and started feeling new pains, even though they're just in my head, probably. Yeah. So Ben,
we're glad you went and got checked out, Simon.
Yeah, me too. Just to have him tell me there's nothing I can do. Tell me over the last couple of weeks, what have you been up to, Ben?
Well, I think the highlight for me is I just wrapped up season 27 of ski coaching. And then a couple of days later, to accelerate that transition, headed back to the Wallowa Mountains, entered out of Union, Oregon, and spent 5 days and 4 nights backcountry skiing with some of my closest ski buddies, dating back to the mid 80s. 2 close friends, Tyler and David, that I grew up ski racing with, as well as a number of other good friends that I've met along the way, including a good friend, Tyler's, that flew up from the Bay Area with him. We spent one night in a yurt, and the comforts of that environment. And then we threw on the heavy packs and crawled over the mountains into the deeper little zone in the range, and set up a camp there with one large teepee tent that we used to kind of hang out in. It had a titanium wood stove to keep us all warm. And then at night, we'd retreat into what are called mega mids, which are super lightweight, single wall tents, little micro teepees, there were two of us in each of those, and slept in that environment for 3 days, and skied for 4 days out there, and lots of lines. The guides had never skied before, and yeah, it was phenomenal. I've been doing that since 2010 with the same guides, and so seeing that relationship evolve has been incredible. Sharing that with a variety of friends. We've always got kind of a bit of a core, but then, a couple rotate in and out for whatever reason each year. And this year was interesting in that we got a bunch of snow the front end of the week. And so we had to kind of ease into the terrain carefully because there was some snow stability issues, a variety of natural slides, both wet, loose, wet, dry, dry, loose, that were revealed on the mountain. So we couldn't get into some of the upper alpine terrain that we wanted to, as well as some sun crest. So we had to kind of sniff out the POW, and they did an amazing job. And we got lots of really good skiing and just time walking in the mountains each day.
When you say those little 2-man single walled or whatever tents, are you digging into the snow for those? Are you building little platforms and you do the low section so cold air goes down into that? Is that what you're doing? Like not a cave, but just on the snow?
Yeah.
Burr.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, because they do come down at an angle on the ground. You end up digging down lower so that when you wake up in the night, you're not like face up against condensed moisture on that single wall. So yeah, we're probably digging down about 2 feet. We've got a little bench on either side, a kind of a central countertop, if you will, that forms the base that the pole sticks up from, the single pole. In this case, we just chopped down some dead old trees, but a lot of times you just use a ski pole, extend it out, and then you pull it tight on either end. But the trick is that the part you dig down is sort of inside the outer area of the mega mid material, so that you can then kind of cover up around it. So when the wind picks up, it's not blowing in the tent so much, but kind of up and over.
Oh, wow.
So it's not the most comfortable environment by any stretch, even with a 0-degree sleeping bag, an air mattress, and a foam mattress. But man, getting into that terrain and not seeing another soul for 4 or 5 days is pretty special.
Yeah, and snuggling up with another dude in one of those tents, just trying to stay warm. All of this you're carrying, right? Like each of you are just carrying a bag, your pack, like, and that's it, right?
Yeah, but the good news is that we just have to carry it from the starting point, which in this case was their base camp with the yurt, and carrying it up and over about 2,000 feet of vertical feet, and that's not optimal, but it's about 4 miles and 2,000 feet, and then we unload all of that weight, the sleeping bag, the food, the fuel, and then from there on, we're traveling with much lighter packs throughout the day for those 3 days. That in contrast to when we traversed the range back in 2021, and in that case, each day starts by breaking down camp, loading it all in your backpack, usually 30 to 35 pounds, moving to the next spot later that day. And then as the sun sets and it gets really cold really fast, you're rapidly digging out your tent spot, and then huddling around a fire and trying to stay warm before retreating for the night. So that was a little bit more of a rugged experience, but yeah, it's all pretty magical being out there in the Wallowa Mountain Range.
Yeah, it's funny. I've done a few trips, a lot of camping over the years in a couple different countries and stuff. And one of the things I always notice is it's different than like RV or tent camping where you're like with supplies and all that. Because you'll stay up maybe till 10, maybe 11, like around the campfire, telling stories, drinking beer or whatever. But when you're out there and heat starts to just like drop, temps drop, your little fire, you maybe are limited on wood, maybe supplies, and it's not that big. So it's just like, it's the thought that it's warm. Do you find yourself like looking at your clock, your watch when you're in bed, you're like, it's 6:30, like, screw it, I'm in bed, right?
Yeah. 100%. 100%. I was pretty ill-equipped in 2021. I'm getting better at this whole winter camping thing, but yeah, now we've got better equipment, but learned a lot of tricks. And going to bed early is definitely one of the best ones. That and heating up water and putting that in an Nalgene and sleeping with the hot water.
Mm.
Along with also like hand warmers, your typical hand warmers, throwing those in your pocket. All those are really great tricks that sometimes are learned the hard way after a couple of really, really cold nights out.
Yeah, not that this is totally comparable, but I used to like up at Schweitzer, where you used to ski as well. Schweitzer over there. Um, I used to sleep in the back of my truck up there. So we'd ski one day, sleep in the bed of the truck, which just, had a canopy, right? It's not out air open, but
Yep.
it's
Yep.
cold. First night I realized my mistake was that I left my pants outside of my sleeping bag. So when I got up, they were like a brand new pair of Carhartts, when they're like just stiff, right? I couldn't even move my
Crisp.
pants. So I was like, all right, night 2, they went in and at the foot, I just put them in my sleeping bag. They were so much easier to put
Yep.
on and warmer.
Yep.
Yeah, lesson learned for
Yeah.
sure. Nice. Well, let's
that and when you're out there. Oh, I was going to say, just closing comment on that is when you're out there moving through the mountains, you have to sleep with your boot liners in your sleeping bag as well. Otherwise, same situation. You wake up and it's just an ice block. And so, in this case, we did have the guide tent which had the stove, so we just hung them high in there and let them dry all night. But yeah, when you're out there, changing camp each day, you end up sleeping with that in your tent. So it's not for everybody. But it's pretty magical out there if you can endure some of that.
Imagine the smell in that sleeping bag and tents afterwards is ripe. Nice.
Yeah. I'm told.
Let's kick off. Let's kick off with today's topic, which admittedly is semi foreign to me. Everyone that's joining in, I had to kind of go at it new. I did a lot of research and talked about it with Ben behind the scenes, really just because I wanted to learn more. So this session, just our disclaimer: we are not financial experts. We are not your financial advisors. Simon definitely is not who you should go to. Ben is not. However, I think we both have some unique perspective and experience when it comes to today's topic. Most specifically in tech, banking, and what I call the VC mattress, right? So it's where you put your money under a mattress, which would probably be safer than what recently happened in the news with Silicon Valley Bank. So why don't we just start off? What happened? What's kind of the big synopsis recently in the news for tech banking, Ben?
Yeah, so I, like you, am not a banking expert. We've all been lucky here at Cascade to have Christy running the show from the controller seat over the last 17 years. But I have been able to benefit from some excellent information from some resources that I have, including the Portland Seed Fund, as well as EO, which is short for Entrepreneur Organization. So I received some good material from both of those, and I was going to share some high points. This is definitely targeted at a higher level, kind of operator perspective, to try and just sort of distill down in layman terms what exactly went down and what we can learn from this. So definitely want to add that caveat, and of course we're always looking for feedback and ideas, and who might even want to come on and help us go deeper on the subject. But fundamentally, what my understanding is, this is essentially a crisis of confidence, and caused by a wildfire spread by a few venture capitalists advising their portfolio companies to withdraw money. So plain and simple, it was a bank run. And it's interesting because Silicon Valley Bank, or SVB, had bonds that had declined in value, but the underlying securities themselves remained sound. So they had this huge amount of exposure due also to the number of tech company dollars that have been deposited since the pandemic. And essentially that resulted in a liquidity problem, not due to underlying assets or deposits, but due to the exposure to venture capital backed companies and rising interest rates causing bond prices to drop. So that's sort of in a very high level nutshell, kind of how things transpired. Um, so from there, I think a key point to mention is that banks failed due to a lack of capital. And so as we look back on the last several weeks, the first bank that went down was Silvergate. It was highly crypto focused, and obviously cryptocurrency is very volatile. The next one that we're all talking about here is Silicon Valley Bank. High concentration in startup technology. 40% of their assets were in investments, and too many of the long-term plays were from low interest rate investments. And as the rates changed so much as a result of increasing interest rates by the Fed, the bonds were kicking out lower rates. And then ultimately their equity to debt ratio got below 5%. And that's kind of the threshold for the FDIC. Another interesting thing about Silicon Valley Bank is that 90% of the deposits were uninsured, which means there was more than $250,000 in those each of those accounts. So, these are a lot of high net worth organizations, and in some case, individuals. And then Signature Bank was the most recent, I guess, the one after Silicon Valley Bank, and what they found was the long term assets were under duress, fast growth, lots of crypto, and then long term SBA lending program. So those are some of the high level details. And Simon, I think you'd identified there were some, like who is this impacting? Maybe you want to talk to us a little bit about some of the research you had done and identify who some of those organizations were that we may or may not be familiar with.
Yeah. So one of the things that I noticed, Ben, and really I'm going to answer your question, but also when I Googled this, when I searched it, I saw the news reports. Just out of curiosity, so we're talking about over 90% of the bank assets, the cash that was in there was over what the FDIC insures, up to $250,000. Who are the people standing in line when they were doing the run on bank? Like, we're talking about people that potentially have money over $250,000 and they're standing in line outside Monday morning. I want to know who those people are, right? Like, are they actually like going in to pull out their millions in cash? Are they going out to get it transferred? Like, they're sitting there knocking on the door. Are they opening? When are they opening? Like, what about my millions? I just want to be friends with those people, maybe. Like,
there you go. Yeah, I just want to follow behind them and see what falls out of their pockets. I'm sure I'd be in a great position if I did that.
Yeah. So speaking,
well,
go ahead.
I was going to say, and interestingly enough, technology is one of the biggest issues that led to this. Is that technology allowed for communication to accelerate, for these limited number of VC firms to get this message out to their funded portfolio companies, and to have them move that swiftly to make this bank run go so quick. I think it was like 4 hours, and the whole thing collapsed. And so interesting how technology helped create this problem, yet people then reverted to the old analog. I'm going to go stand in line around the corner at the bank and see if I can withdraw my bags of cash. Like, I mean, the irony in that is pretty wild.
Yeah. So again, speaking of companies, so I did some search and just figure out which companies were impacted most by this. And when we start talking about these numbers here, they're numbers that I just can't fathom fully. So Roku, right? I have a Roku TV in the garage. I think we have one in our camper. So apparently the company had a total cash and cash equivalent of approximately 1.9 million as of March 10 this year. Approximately 480 million was held in SVB, right? So 480 million. That's 26% of the company's cash or cash equivalent as of that date. So approximately, 1.4 billion of the company's cash equivalent was distributed across multiple financial institutions, right? So other organizations, Roblox. Roblox, I know my son knows better than I do. 3 billion in cash and securities balance as of February 28th of this year. Approximately 5% is held in Silicon Valley Bank, which was 150 million in there. So one of the statements that I keep seeing in here is basically that it's not going to affect day to day, that $150 million gone right now and having to be sorted out. doesn't affect their day to day. So big business, right? Let's see. We'll go down here. Rocket Lab USA, another one that I somehow recognize. Approximately 38 million, which is approximately 7.9% of the total cash and securities by that company as of December 31st, the end of last year. Scrolling down, QuantumScape. Um, let's see, SoFi Tech. SoFi, that's a big company. I recognize that name. Um, yeah, they didn't even tell us how much was in there. Actually, no. The company has approximately $40 million lending facility that was provided through Silicon Valley Bank, which is unaffected apparently by the FDIC receivership from that bank. So we're talking about big dollars, obviously, right?
Yeah.
What about those
Yeah.
under 250,000?
In terms of organizations,
Yeah.
I can imagine if I was the CFO and the CEO of an organization, that would be pretty frightening. Um, Assuming that under $250,000 represented a significant amount of the cash for that organization. I mean, this happened, mid-month, so a lot of people are trying to make payroll. They're really trying to conduct business with these banks, and then this news comes and starts to really have a serious impact on things. So, depending on whether or not they've distributed funds across multiple banks, they may or may not have been in a position to respond to that. And I can imagine that was a pretty excruciating, 48 hours over that weekend before things
Mm.
started to clear up. And it seemed like things got moving pretty well with a lot of government assistance come Monday to help, address this exposure and these challenges. Another thing I've heard for sure is, gosh, $250,000, given the amount of inflation we've seen and how long that threshold has remained flat, it's probably time for that number to change and to increase dramatically, because, gosh, it doesn't take very long as an organization that you're going to need to have more than $250,000 safeguarded in a bank, and not have to worry about a disruption like this, as you scale. And so, that's a great question. And I think it all depends on how well diversified these organizations were, if they were exposed to some of these impacts with these limited number of mid-sized banks that are being exposed to this.
So what does this mean for other tech startups that maybe have money in other banks? What do you think they're doing or did Monday morning, Tuesday morning, with all this news?
It's a great question. I imagine they were making phone calls to their banks. They were, probably certainly trying to get information as much as they could from their own CFOs and other advisors if they were, dealing with other people's money in the way of angel funds or venture capital funds. Probably trying to seek counsel from them, but my hunch is they were looking at a couple different avenues. One of is making sure they're not over leveraged in any one bank, or I shouldn't say leveraged, but invested in any one bank. The other tool that's out there that I learned a little bit about is that there are some of these opportunities where you can purchase insurance to cover funds over that $250,000. So, yeah, the FDIC is going to cover that first $250,000, but beyond that, a lot of banks have these vehicles that you can, for fairly reasonable amount of money, you can purchase insurance that greater protects your cash balances. And as with all things, the more you have, the easier it is in many cases to get access to that stuff. And so, we've even got some relationships with financial providers that allow us protection up to $1 million in an account.
Mm.
So again, that's FDIC covers that first 250K, and then through fee structures, whether they're obvious or not, there's additional coverage above and beyond that, so you can feel more comfortable. But I think it does highlight that it's one more thing that organizations need to really be keenly aware of, that perhaps they had this growing, amount of confidence over the last, decade and a half that, that's not going to be a problem. And in many cases, I think it might help too, if I were to jump through and kind of talk about the why behind this, sort of how did this happen? And was this, at all tied to what we saw with the Great Recession,
Mm-hmm.
in the late aughts. And so that was some eye-opening experience I'd love to share here as well.
Yeah, for sure.
So Yeah. So jumping in on that, I think a lot of this we can date back to the PPP stimulus. So essentially, what happened with PPP is it was the equivalent of applying gas to the economy, right? So assets grew dramatically as the federal government infused a bunch of cash into the system to organizations, as well as to individuals. And so the problems weren't credit based, but they were long term asset related, which constrains institutions. So here
Mm.
we are bumping along in 2020. We have this big scare. A lot of things get shut down, delayed, stalled. The government's like, we're going to throw a lot of money in here to keep the economy running, and that was great. But then all of a sudden we see in the last year a whole bunch of inflation, and that's one of these few tools the Fed has to address this inflation issue that surfaced as a result of all of that accelerated economic activity. And so inflation is intended to lower production, increase the cost of money of borrowing. And we've seen in fact, the Fed's raised rates again today, a quarter point. And that's, I just read an interesting article about that where they were saying basically it's this balance between managing against inflation, which still is creeping up, but also not trying to destabilize the banking industry further than it already is. But when you do increase those rates, that's the equivalent of slamming on the brakes for the economy. And so you've got these opposing forces from that started with the PPP stimulus, and now you've got the impacts of inflation. All of this accelerated again by technology, and we're seeing that some banks that had exposure that they couldn't manage against are failing. And it's interesting because these issues, back in the Great Recession, they were issues with credit risk, right? And that there
Mm.
were investments that weren't protected. And in this case, it's not about credit risk, because a lot of these issues were the result of these government backed bonds that had these interest rates that are now being impacted by inflation. So it's a matter of timing with interest rate chart changes. It's not an issue of credit risk. So it's just this new soup of problems and some new issues that banks are having to manage against, and therefore their customers.
So this really does affect access to money as well as what I'm hearing, right?
Yeah, yeah, certainly is impacting that because if it seems like everything in many cases um, the money's there. It's not that it's just that they've got a whole lot more in the way of liabilities. And so if everyone's coming in trying to get their money at once, especially in these cases where the assets to are only represent 5% or less, then there's just less in the way of money for people to get to, and that's when the FDI steps in.
Mm.
FDIC steps in and says, "Hey, we're going to have to help you manage through this." But as an example, one of the banks that provided some of this information via EO, they hold their assets at 12.5%. So that's what 2.5 times what the FDIC requires before they step in. And so I think taking some more conservative approaches can be very helpful. But obviously, if you're holding on to that additional, 1.5 times or 7.5% of investable money, that's leaving money on the table as a bank, and that can be a tough move to make if they're really trying to grow. But obviously, taking a little bit more of a conservative approach can really look genius in moments like this.
Yeah. So let's get back to one of the acronyms you just said, EO. We need to explain what that is. But first, I read a quote from CNN, an article they wrote last week, and they said this, that basically they highlight the SVB. I can't even say that right. SVB, Silicon Valley Bank, had very heavy exposure to the tech industry, which has particularly been hit hard by the raising interest rates. So my question to you is why is it that tech was hit hard by interest rates? Like why specifically?
Well, I think a lot of these tech
5 minutes
companies, especially
later.
software as a service companies, they require a lot of money to operate. And back in 2008 when we hatched Brand Live, and then we spun that out in 2012, 2013. We quickly learned that in order to grow, you lose money. It costs more money to grow than the growth provides, and so you're kind of constantly trying to show enough growth to get access to more funding, so you can show more growth, so you can get access to more funding. Then you hope to kind of like shoot the moon and have someone decide to acquire you before the economy slows down like this, and all of a sudden your ability to raise more funds is compromised. So in a nutshell, that's my understanding of it, is that a lot of these tech companies just require so much money to grow, and when they can't as easily find investment as we're seeing with a lot of companies, the investment community is not as inclined to lend money, and the cost of money is higher. Then all of a sudden they're looking around and getting a little bit more desperate. So, we've seen that with a couple of our clients that are in the funded technology startup space in the last year, really have to face some tough challenges because they were kind of going along and burning money like crazy, because that's why the investors give it to you, not to hold on to it, but to spend it and grow.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, some factors outside of their control shift. They're going back out to market trying to find money, and they're looking at it going, man, people are less inclined to loan us money, and or the cost of money is so prohibitive that it doesn't make sense to take on some of that, what you might call harder money, that is has ultimately it just has the access to it is much less friendly, and then the ramifications of not paying back on time get a lot less friendly as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned software as a service, so there is that as being an asset, right? The intellectual properties to patented, technology pieces, but it's a little different, obviously, than like real estate, right? Because you still have that hard asset of a building or property or land. So finding money for it's easier because they can go and collect from you. But I think in tech, right, is you have less of that. You have fewer of that. You don't have a fleet of vehicles. You don't have a bunch of restaurant buildings that are taking up space in downtown Portland, Seattle, Spokane area, right? So that may also be part of that difference, why tech is a little different that way. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's less tangible. It's less real. A lot of that is goodwill. It is intellectual property or IP, and that takes confidence. That takes trust, and it's not something like you said where if it can go from a massive valuation to literally zero because it's code, it's ether in many cases. And if people lose trust in that, it's gone, versus, something hard and tangible like real estate, like, hard assets in the form of vehicles and the like. At least there's something that, an investor could hope to recover of their original investment.
Yeah, that makes sense. So as far as Cascade, how does this affect us? Why not? What are the areas that you kind of look out for us?
Yeah. Well, a lot of credit goes to Christy, our controller, in that it doesn't immediately impact us. We're not working with these mid-sized banks that are showing this vulnerability. We work with, some of the big four banks, and essentially we work really hard to avoid these balances that are in excess of the insured amounts as well. So that's something that we have kept an eye on, fortunately, but also fortunately we're not with these riskier institutions that have shown weakness in this time. Now, obviously, there could be a larger ripple effect that could impact some larger banks like we operate with, but for now, we seem to have dodged that bullet, and there were a couple of those accounts where we needed to move some funds around, and this was a heck of a wake up call. Fortunately, not resulting in a lot of lost sleep immediately, but making sure that, hey, we're playing by those rules, and we're doing everything we can to protect our clients and our team and ultimately the organization.
So this is a little off our notes. I don't think I'll throw you under the bus with this question, but is this, as I hear words that start with R, recession, coming up with stuff like that, looking at this year, is this potentially just like the turkey little indicator that it's done? Is this is actually a good thing? I just know since the Great Depression, since the crash in what was it, 2008, right? that this is maybe actually a healthy thing, that maybe it is, like you're saying, a chance for everyone to reanalyze where their money is, to kind of secure their positioning. Do you think that's the case with this?
I don't know. I don't know enough about this space. I think it's getting a little bit above my pay grade with that question. But in that article that I was reading, I think it was the Washington Post, just before this call, they were talking about the concern with that interest rate hike that happened today by the Fed. If that further slows down the economy, then we could be moving into that recessionary
Hmm.
phase. And some people were being critical of the Fed saying, hey, everything was leveling out. We didn't need to do that. And with this, some of the situations in the banking industry right now, maybe that wasn't the right call. So
Hmm.
but I think it's definitely one of those times where, having having some cash on hand, not requiring a lot of outside financing, is probably the safest place to be right now. And certainly having confidence that your cash is in a safe place, so that should the economy continue to slow, you're in a position to weather that storm. I think we've been giving a lot of attention to, those types of concerns over the last several years, and certainly in the last several weeks.
So I guess to round this out, just with one of the final last questions, and again, we're not financial advisors, we're not pros at this. We're just giving kind of our opinion and our look at this after kind of doing some research and from our experience. What do you think you would suggest to any startup, any organization that's just working with a VC? What would you suggest for them to operate with a VC that way?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, maybe for a little context, again, Brand Live is a company that we hatched here in Cascade, and then we spun it out and raised money multiple times before exiting that organization at the end of I should say the beginning of 2020. And what we learned through that is that oftentimes these venture capital funds, these investment funds and angel funds, they all have partnerships with these banks, and those banks work really hard to be appealing to the fund and all of the all of the portfolio companies within them. And so we received a fair amount of pressure when we were going through that kind of program and system with these VC funds and capital funds. And at that time, our controller again was Christy, and she said, "No, we're good. We're in a good spot." So while she was in control of that, she said, "Hey, we're gonna go with what we know. We're gonna stay with one of the big four banks, and that's good enough for our needs right now." In terms of advice I would give to others is, ultimately follow the money. Just get a sense of why a certain venture capital organization or fund is pushing the other, or a specific bank. What's in it for the fund, and then what's in it for you, and what kind of exposure is acceptable to your business to work with that bank versus any other kind of bank. So yeah, we did receive a lot of pressure, and ultimately made the decision not to. I don't know. I have no idea what Brand Live, what their banking situation is currently. It's none of my business, but I just know before, when we were working with, more, larger banks with largely distributed portfolios and banking practices, that served us well then, and it continues to serve us well. I'm sure we missed some opportunities by not jumping in with that, with Silicon Valley at the time, or some of these other banks that are sponsors. But yeah, I think like anything in this day and age, chase the money down, get a sense of where motivations are, and make sure that they align with what you're trying to accomplish ultimately as a customer.
Wow. Yeah, that's kind of common sense, or just basic good advice, and a reminder probably for some of those out there. Huh. Well, I think it's a good spot to end it there. Again, this topic was different for me because it's very high level. It's the money stuff, right? So as we talk to our audience and for our audience, as we think about topics, I know that you and I were kind of like, what would this appeal to? Who would this appeal to? And quite frankly, I think you being business owner, me being employee, we talked about employee, employer. I feel like in tech world, those that kind of have their ears perked and are listening to, financial, the environment around them, I feel like that topic should be relevant for everyone, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, and it's really interesting to think about how, what a business owner should share and present to members of his team. And I think, fortunately, we're in a position where we do our best to be as transparent as possible. And I'm very comfortable saying to our team that, fortunately, this is not one that bit us. And much like we like to share with our clients, that when there's widespread, like malware issues and viruses and bugs, we've been able to avoid a lot of those things, and sometimes being a little bit smaller, maybe taking some more conservative approaches around security, and in this case, banking, can really pay off versus, kind of full throttle risk profile in all areas of the business. Obviously, that can create some exciting growth, but it can also create volatility. So, I would certainly be curious to know what some of these institutions are sharing with their employees, and where they just decide to kind of keep their head in the sand. And it's just, another example over the 25 years I've been doing this, where fortunately we can report stability and safety to our team. And that's a really comfortable place to be.
Yeah. And from the employee perspective, I think all of us that have always taken pride in what we do and taken ownership in what we do, there's a certain amount of that transparency that we really appreciate, right? As an employee, I kind of want to know those things. However, there's some things that I'm just straight up, nope, I don't want to know. You manage that. I'm good. I'm trusting, right? But I think there is that balance of like you sharing that with me, or leadership in other organizations sharing it with their team. And granted, obviously it's a level-based kind of knowledge where management directors, C-suite may know more. Obviously, they need to potentially know more. But I think having that kind of transparency with that situation, I think just helps a lot of people give more buy-in and more trust that when leadership is telling them something, I think it's just easier to swallow, So, well, I appreciate it. I'll say that. I've always been part of that. So, I think that rounds out our topic today. Just as a reminder for everyone that is listening, we'd love to hear your comments, questions. We did set up an email. I mentioned that last podcast. Stefan took care of that like the following day. So email questions, comments, anything you want us to highlight, or if you even want to be on the show with us, email us at webwell@cascadewebdev.com. So again, that's webwell@cascadewebdev.com. And don't forget to give us a follow and a like and all those things that people say at the end of podcasts. So definitely appreciate all you listeners. Ben, thanks again for sharing. Next podcast, just a quick little teaser. Stefan's going to be joining us, and we're going to talk about machines. We're going to talk about machines that can respond, also known as AI. So stay tuned for that. I look forward to it.
Awesome. Thank you, Simon. Look forward to talking to everyone soon.